On Thursday, March 14, 2024, at 7:05 p.m., I moved into Unit 2B at 413 West Oak Street in Missoula, Montana. It was 38 degrees outside with a slow, steady drizzle that made the pavement shine under the orange streetlights. The building sat between a laundromat that always smelled like warm detergent and a small bar called The Robin with a neon bird that blinked in a simple rhythm. The apartment itself was basic but clean. Off-white walls, a narrow galley kitchen with a humming fridge, and a living room with a thrift store couch that leaned slightly to the left as if it had an opinion about who sat on it. I rolled my last box down the hall, stepping around a shallow dip in the carpet where the padding had flattened over years of footsteps, and met Ben in the kitchen. He was 26, a little older than me, with a trimmed beard and the kind of glasses that made everyone look smarter. He had posted on a local housing group that he needed a roommate to split rent. By text, he had been polite and efficient. He spoke the same way in person. He shook my hand, pointed out the shelf that would be mine, asked if I had any allergies because he cooked with sesame oil, and told me the trash pickup was on Mondays and I could use his broom. But the vacuum was temperamental and worked best if you pushed it forward with pressure and pulled it back lightly. I liked him immediately. He was clear about things. I was coming off a sublet with a friend of a friend who had never once done the dishes and had a habit of playing videos on his phone at full volume, so little rules sounded like a relief. The first 2 evenings were quiet. On Friday, I set up my desk by the east-facing window and listened to the rain tick against the glass. On Saturday morning at 9:10 a.m., I walked to the grocery store on Alder to stock the pantry. I bought eggs, a bag of green apples, ground coffee, a carton of oat milk, and 2 boxes of pasta. When I got back, Ben was at the small kitchen table with a legal pad and a mug of tea. He was labeling a chart with our names and days of the week. He suggested we alternate cleaning the bathroom every Sunday. He drew little check boxes and said we could just initial them. He apologized for being the kind of person who needed a chart. I told him I preferred it. Normal stuff. He laughed and said, "Good, then just one more thing," and glanced toward the hallway. He said the second bedroom at the end of the hall was technically storage. The landlord kept some things in there. He said, "Please keep that door shut at night." He said it once in a normal tone and then again, softer. "Keep that door shut at night." He smiled after he said it, which somehow made the request feel stranger. I nodded. I asked why, because it sounded like a line with a story behind it. He said the building was old and the door could drift open if the latch was not fully engaged. He had a thing about waking up to open doors. He said it made him feel like he had gotten up and done it, like sleepwalking, and that unsettled him. That made sense to me. My mother used to put a rubber band around our pantry handles because the cat could hook them open with a paw. Sometimes you live with a quirk until it becomes a rule. The first subtle thing was not the door. It was the spoon. On Saturday night, we ate pasta and watched a basketball game with the volume low. At 11:40 p.m., he rinsed his dishes, wiped the counters with a lemon-scented spray, and went to his room. I stayed up on the couch with my laptop. The apartment had that late-night quiet where you can hear the small mechanics of a home working, the fridge compressor kicking in with a nudge and a hum, the baseboard heater clicking as the metal expanded, the muffled laughter from the bar downstairs when the door opened. At 12:03 a.m., I heard a small tap from the kitchen, a quick light sound. I thought a drip had hit the metal sink. Then the same tap again, slightly delayed like a reply. I got up and looked. A teaspoon rested near the stovetop, still damp from being washed, and it was vibrating in place as if someone had just set it down too firmly. It stilled. I chalked it up to a truck rumbling by, but when I looked out the window, the street was empty. I pushed the spoon fully onto the towel and went back to the couch. When I heard the tap a third time, I told myself not to be dramatic. I turned on a podcast to fill the blank air. I went to bed a little after 1. As I passed the storage room, I noticed Ben had made good on his own rule. The door was shut and the knob was turned down tight. On Sunday morning, I woke at 7:20 a.m. because the church across the way rang its bells. I went to the kitchen and saw that Ben had lined our mugs on the counter. He had a system for everything. He looked a little tired. He asked if I had heard any noise in the night. I said only the bar. He gave a little nod like he was satisfied with that. I asked about the storage room again because it itched at my curiosity. He shrugged and said the landlord kept paint cans and folding chairs in there. He said, if you have to go in during the day, no problem, but at night it sticks in a weird way and it just makes me feel off. He looked like someone who had rehearsed that line, which seemed odd, but people rehearse how to set boundaries. I respected it. The second subtle thing was the window in the hall. It was one of those narrow, frosted panes that let in light but no details. On Sunday at 6:15 p.m., the sky was turning that blue that feels like a bruise, and the drizzle had changed into tiny flakes that melted as they touched anything. I walked past the window and saw a shape pause at the glass. Not a face, not a clear outline, just a blurring of the light like something stationary on the other side. I heard what sounded like cloth against brick. Then the shape was gone. I opened the front door and looked down the stairs. The landing smelled of cold air and the damp cardboard of old moving boxes. No one stood at the window. Back upstairs, Ben was measuring rice into a pot. I asked if he had ordered something. He said no. I told him I thought someone had been standing outside the window. He said sometimes people cut through the alley on their way to the Robin. He said kids press their hands on the glass. He said not to worry. Then he said it would be good to keep the storage door shut tonight because the wind could shift pressure in the hallway. He said it easy, but I could tell he wanted me to register it. I felt a little childish for how often the storage door had entered my thoughts, like a kid worrying the loose tooth with their tongue because it is the only wrong thing in an otherwise ordinary mouth. By Monday, I had started a new job downtown. So the apartment took on that rhythm of leaving at 8:20 a.m. and returning at 6:10 p.m., with the same light poles in the same places, the same click of the thermostat at the same time, the same voices under my window after midnight. Monday night I heard the spoon again at 12:07 a.m., that quick metronome tap from the kitchen. I got up, and this time the spoon lay where I had left it, and the sound came from inside the fridge. Ben had warned me the fridge hummed, but this was more like a tiny knock from inside the cold. I pressed my palm against the door and felt the vibration of the motor. It knocked again, a single tick like something cooling. I told myself it was the compressor. I took a breath, went to the bathroom, passed the storage door, and checked it was shut. I slept. Tuesday was when the rules started to feel less like quirks and more like sandbags. Around a house you know has flooded before. I came home at 6:02 p.m. and found a new index card on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a trout. In neat block letters, Ben had written night checklist. Lock top and bottom on front door. Latch for back window. Hall light off. Storage door closed. He had drawn a box next to each item. He had initialed them for Sunday and Monday. He left space for my initials. It felt parental, but it also relieved something in me. If you can check the boxes, you can pretend you are in control. We ate stir-fry and watched a documentary about an Everest expedition. The climbers got trapped in a storm. Ben shook his head at the decision-making. He said he hated when people refused to turn back. That night at 1:11 a.m., I woke to the soft, specific sound of a door easing open and then easing shut, as if someone was careful not to wake the place. I lay in bed with my eyes open, waiting for my brain to decide whether to be afraid. My bedroom was dark except for the red LED of the power strip. I heard the soft step of socks on carpet. The sound stopped at my door. I felt the familiar shape of my heartbeat rising into my neck. The step moved away. I got up and opened my door. The hall was dim. At the far end, the storage door stood closed. A line of cold air lay along the floor like a spill. On Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., my boss asked if I was settling in. I said yes and heard how my voice had that too bright edge it gets when you are managing a private worry by yourself. I bought a small battery light at the hardware store because the hall felt gloomier than it should. I put the light on the console table, clicked it on, and told myself that paying attention to light was a grown-up way to handle vague fear. Ben got home later than usual. He had snow in his hair. He asked if I could take his turn to wipe down the bathroom because he had a deadline. I said sure. He looked grateful in a way that made me like him more. He said he would do my trash run next week. He started to walk down the hall, then looked back and said door, and flicked his eyes toward the storage room. I said, I know. He said, humor me. At 2:23 a.m., I learned the sound the storage door made when it opened slowly. It was not a squeak. It was a soft, plush pressure release, the way a heavy book sighs when you lift it. I sat up immediately. I could feel the air shift against my face, the smallest draft on the hairs of my forearms. I looked at the sliver of dark under my door. It changed, not brighter or darker, but textured, as if the small light at the console table was now broken by something moving in front of it. I told myself it was Ben, awake to pee, avoiding the bright overhead so he would not fully wake himself. Then I heard him roll over in his bed in the room next to mine. The sound was unmistakable. The springs in his frame creaked and then settled. I counted to 30 in my head. I opened my door. The hall light was off as always at night. The little battery lamp threw a soft circle of light. In that circle, the storage door stood open by 6 inches. The smell that came out was not paint or old cardboard. It was cooler than the hall and carried a faint damp chalk smell, like a basement. I could see a stack of folding chairs, their metal legs reflecting the small light. A drop of something clear hung on the tip of the door latch, the way condensation forms on a cold glass. I reached out and pushed the door shut. It latched with that soft book closing sound. I wiped my fingers on my shirt. I stood in the hall for a while with my hand on the knob, feeling my own pulse travel through metal. In the morning I told Ben the door had been open. I wanted him to have the same low-grade panic so I would not feel foolish. He looked at me in a concentrated way and asked if I had fully turned the knob to engage the latch the night before. I said I had. He asked if I had used the checklist. I said I had initialed all the boxes. He nodded and stared into his coffee. Then he said he had to be honest. The landlord had told him something when he first moved in. He warned him that the building had settled weird and the hall sometimes created pressure that pulled doors. He said sometimes you heard a door open when it had not. He said you heard it in the framing and the old wood. He smiled in a way that wanted to be reassuring. Then he added that if it would make me feel better, we could push one of the dining chairs against the storage door at night. I knew chairs against doors did nothing if you were dealing with anything other than a push from the inside, but the offer helped. That night we wedged the chair under the knob at an angle, legs biting into the carpet. We stood there together like engineers. He said, better. I said, better. At 3:02 a.m., the chair scraped. It did not fall, but it moved enough to make a stretched, complaining sound against the carpet. I was in the hall in seconds. The lamp burned quietly in its circle. The chair stood at a new angle. A thin black scuff marked the carpet where it had inched. The storage door still looked closed, but when I put my palm on it, I could feel a vibration. Not strong, not sustained, but a stuttering tremor like a phone on silent vibrating across a table. I knocked once. The vibration stopped. Ben opened his door behind me and said my name in a voice that was not quite a whisper. We stood there together, bare feet cold on the floor. He said, "Did you knock?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do not knock again." He did not smile when he said it. On Friday, March 22nd at 6:45 p.m., after a week of little sleep and too much coffee, I decided I would look inside the storage room in daylight and satisfy the part of my brain that chews its own tail when it is denied. Ben was at the library. I turned the knob, pushed, and clicked on my phone flashlight. The room was narrower than I had imagined, more like a long closet. The folding chairs leaned against one wall. 2 paint cans sat on the floor, one lid dented like someone had stepped on it. A mop with a mildewed head leaned in the corner. On a low shelf I saw a small stack of old phone books, the kind with a yellowed cover and spiral binding. In the back wall, about knee-height, there was a square cutout covered by a panel. It was screwed in on one side and hooked on the other like a small access door. I bent down and smelled that damp, chalky scent stronger now. I did not open the panel. I am not brave by temperament. I took 3 pictures with my phone so my brain would stop inventing shapes for the dark. I closed the storage door and latched it, turning the knob as far as it would go. That night Ben cooked a big pot of chili. He turned on music louder than usual. He talked about a hike he wanted to take when the weather cleared. He seemed upbeat in a way that felt like a decision. I helped chop onions. We ate with the window fogged up. At one point he put his spoon down and looked toward the hall without meaning to. He caught himself and smiled and asked me what time I had to be at work Monday. I said 9. He said we should watch a movie Saturday to keep our minds occupied. He said that as if he had said it before. In a different version of this timeline. At 1:57 a.m., Ben tapped on my door and said my name. I opened it. He had that pale look people get when they stand up too fast. He said he heard something in the storage room. He said it was like a hand on the other side of the wall. We walked down the hall together. I could feel the brush of his shoulder. The chair was wedged under the knob. The lamp cast its small pool. He turned off the lamp to make the room darker and somehow safer. We stood and listened. In the quiet I could hear the robin throwing out last call. I could hear the hum of our fridge. I could hear something like a soft fingertip tapping on wood from inside the storage room. A polite sound, patient, spaced with time between to be sure it was heard. Ben took a breath like he was going to speak and then did not. He looked at me and moved his mouth in a small shape that meant check the checklist. I lifted the trout magnet and put my finger on the card where we had drawn the boxes. I had initialed storage door closed at 11:08 p.m. I felt the stupid power of a check mark dissolve under a sound that followed its own rules. The escalation did not crash into our lives like a movie. It took the form of small liberties the apartment took with us. A dish towel moved from the oven handle to the back of a chair overnight. The hall lamp flickered and then went steady when someone walked past, like it was tied to our pulses instead of its battery. One morning at 6:30 a.m., I woke to the smell of cold earth in my room, a clean mineral smell that reminded me of caves. My second drawer, the one with T-shirts, stood open 2 inches. I lay there and watched the red dot of the power strip and measured that space. I told myself I had left it open. I had not. I shut it and felt ridiculous and also like I was turning my back on a fox. On Sunday afternoon, the landlord came by to check the bathroom fan. Ben had texted him that the fan rattled. It did not rattle. It gave the landlord a reason to be there. He was 50, wore a fleece with the robin stitched on the chest, and had a laugh that used his whole face. Ben asked him about the pressure in the hall. The landlord said the building had settled in the 80s. He said he had learned to sleep with a white noise machine. He said the storage room held chairs and paint. Ben asked him if he had any pest problems. The landlord said he had put traps for mice the winter before. He said they had not caught much. He did not look at the storage door. He put his hand on it once, almost casually. The skin along his jaw tightened and then relaxed. He smiled again and told us to call if anything leaked. After he left, Ben said, "You saw that." I said, "I did." We left the lamp on all day as if it were a small fire keeping something at bay. By the end of the second week, I started recording on my phone at night. Not video, just audio. I put it on the dresser and let it capture the dark. On Tuesday, March 26th, at 3:13 a.m., the recording caught a sequence of sounds in the hall. A soft step, a pause, a tiny tap like a nail on wood. A second pause, then my name, spoken in my own voice from the direction of the storage door. On playback, I felt my scalp tighten in the way it does when you look over a balcony and realize your body is a container you could spill from. I took the phone to Ben. He listened with headphones and then without. He rewound the same 7 seconds 5 times. He hit stop and stood still in the kitchen with his fingers pressed into the countertop. He said we should not try to talk to it. He said that like it was about more than the audio. On Wednesday, we both stayed out late. We did not plan it. He said he would go to the Robin for a beer after work. I said I would go to the movies. We did not want to be the first one home. I walked in at 10:40 p.m. and found the hall lamp off. The chair was not at the storage door. It was at my bedroom door, leaned simply against it like a joke. A damp smudge darkened one of the chair legs. I went still so quickly that my body hummed with a leftover movement. I pivoted, walked back out, took the stairs slowly, went to the Robin, and found Ben at the bar with his hands wrapped around a pint like it was a mug of soup. I told him about the chair. We both wanted to say that someone had broken in and moved things. We both knew how easy it is to press an apartment into dangerous meanings. He said we could call the landlord to change the locks. He said we could stay at his friend Nate's place. He stood up and left cash, and we walked back together with that stiff motion of men pretending to be ready to hit something. We entered the apartment at 11:10 p.m. The chair was back at the storage door. The lamp glowed. A faint track, like a snail path but dry, curved along the carpet from my room toward the hall, a line of slightly darker fibers as if something had been dragged low and careful. Ben turned to me and said, "Slow down." His voice shook. He went to the kitchen and came back with salt in his fist, which was ridiculous but felt like action. He poured a thin line of it across the threshold of the storage room. I wanted to laugh because I had not known him to be superstitious in any way. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I need to know if it disturbs this." He pushed the chair aside and opened the storage door. The chalk smell rolled out. The line of salt trembled with our breathing and then stilled. We waited. The salt remained a thin white hyphen dot at 2:39 a.m. Something inside the storage room scratched. Not the polite fingertip tap. A longer, heavier drag, like the back of a knuckle, traveled slowly across wood. The salt line rippled as if a breeze passed over it, then settled. Ben shifted his weight and the floor creaked. The scratch stopped. He whispered, "Do not talk." We stood until our legs hurt. We left the door open with the salt, line still intact because we were out of ideas and out of rituals we trusted. The following afternoon I asked for a few days off work because I had the hollowed outlook of someone who had taken their adrenaline supply as a daily vitamin. I told my boss the truth and watched him laugh in the kind way people laugh when they do not have a drawer in their head for what you are saying. I packed a bag. I told Ben I would sleep at my cousin's place across town for a couple nights. He nodded and did not meet my eyes. He asked me if I could take my battery lamp with me. He said it like a child asking for a talisman. I left it for him. I spent 2 nights on my cousin's couch and slept like you do when you leave a loud concert and step into a quiet street where the air is clear. On Saturday morning, Ben texted me a photo of the checklist with all the boxes initialed, and then, underneath in smaller writing, he had added a line I could not parse. It said, "Talk in daylight only." He followed it with a second text, just the time, 11:52 a.m., as if to prove he had obeyed his own rule. At 4:15 p.m. he called me. I could hear the refrigerator behind his voice, that particular kitchen tone neighborhoods share. He said, "Can you come back and help me move the chair into the storage room?" I asked why. He said because he wanted to wedge it against the small panel on the back wall. I said I had not told him about the panel. He did not reply for a full 6 seconds. Then he said, "I know it is there." He said it flat, like a fact that had stopped being a secret and started being a weight. When I arrived, the apartment smelled like damp earth and lemon cleaner. The hall lamp was on. Ben had tidied everything in a way that felt ceremonial. The chair that had been our guard was now our offering. We carried it into the storage room and set it in front of the access panel. Up close, the panel seemed notched from inside as if something had pressed against it in small, regular ways. The screws that held it on the hinge side had scratches around them where a screwdriver had slipped in the past. I asked Ben if the landlord stored anything inside the wall. He said he had never asked. He said he had a bad feeling that asking would make the shape of the answer more solid. He said he had kept the door shut for years and nothing had reached this level. He said something had changed when I moved in. He said that with no blame, but as if we both understood that homes read their occupants like weather, we did the only thing people like us do when we are stuck between superstition and engineering. We tried to stack facts. We wedged the chair tight to the panel. We placed a glass of water on the floor right up against the salt line to see if ripples would record what our eyes missed. We set our phones to record. We left the lamp on and closed the storage door. We went to the living room and sat. We did not turn on a movie. We did not turn on music. We listened to the robin. We listened to our own lungs. We waited until the waiting became the air itself. At 12:41 a.m., the glass of water rang like a tuning fork without sounding a note. I do not know how else to describe it. The water went from flat to stressed, tiny ripples forming that glided from the center out in a steady pattern. The phone audio later captured only our breathing and then a small sound like a finger dragged across a paper napkin. The storage door clicked. We both stood at the same time. Ben put his hand on the knob and did not turn it. He looked at me and his eyes were full of a kind of apology I still do not have words for. He said, "I have been answering it when it says my name." He said it hoarsely, like confession grates the throat. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. I said, "How many times?" He said, "A few." He said it always sounded like me until last week when it started to sound like you. We opened the door. The chair inside pressed against the panel, and the panel had shifted a fraction of an inch. The line of salt was now 2 lines where the carpet fibers had parted. The glass of water had tilted and left a crescent of moisture on the carpet. I knelt and pressed my ear to the access panel. I heard nothing. Then, faint, like something spoken through a glove, came my name in a voice that was not mine and not Ben's, but carried a part of both in a way that made me feel the exact weight of the word uncanny. I stood up and my vision narrowed and widened and narrowed again, a camera adjusting. I said, "We should leave." Ben placed his palm flat against the panel. He said, "Not yet." He said, "I need to say something back." I moved to grab his wrist and the panel flexed against his hand from the inside. A small bulge that pressed his palm out a 1/4 inch. The motion was gentle. It felt exploratory rather than violent, and for some reason that made me more afraid. He inhaled sharply. He opened his mouth and said his own name. The pressure vanished so quickly that he stumbled forward. The chair shifted and scraped. Something inside the wall made a small, satisfied sound that was more texture than tone. It felt like what you hear when you press your ear to a shell and convince yourself it is the ocean. The lamp flickered and steadied. The silence that followed was packed. We did not sleep. We sat on the couch until the window turned pale with morning. A delivery truck downshifted in the street. The robin's neon bird turned off. The apartment returned to its daytime self. Ben looked 10 years older. He said he would call the landlord and say we needed the panel sealed. He did not. He said it, but the call did not happen. He walked to his room and closed his door. I stood in the hall and felt like I was outside a hospital room where an unnameable thing had either ended or begun. I moved out 2 days later. I told Ben I was sorry. I left him my deposit and my lamp. He hugged me in the doorway in a way that felt less like goodbye and more like someone bracing for a wave. The landlord texted me a week later to ask for my forwarding address. He added that he had found some scuff marks in the storage room and would charge us a small fee if they were new. I stared at my phone and wondered what his version of the world had to be to write that sentence. I sent him my address and said the scuffs had been there. I do not know if that was true, but it felt like the kind of lie that keeps a person a little safer. I am writing this on Saturday, May 4th, 2024, at 9:18 p.m., in a different apartment on the other side of town. It is 60 degrees and clear. The street outside smells like cut grass. My new roommate is a woman who teaches 3rd grade and leaves little notes on the counter that say things like good luck with your presentation. I sleep mostly through the night now. I do not check the hall. I do not leave my phone recording. The first week here I told myself that if anything wanted me, it would have to learn a new address. The second week I let that thought shrink. Tonight I was making tea when I heard a quick tap from the cupboard door as if someone inside had tested the wood with a spoon. I put the kettle down and waited for the second tap. It came, delayed and careful, and then nothing for a long time. I stood there with my hand on the counter and told myself every apartment has a rhythm. My phone vibrated with a text. It was from an unknown number. It was a photo of a small square panel set into a wall. In the lower edge of the frame I could see the white rim of a glass of water. The surface wobbled into ripples as if the person taking the picture had moved too quickly. There was no message, just the image, and under it the time, 1:11 a.m., which was not the time here, but the time there if you knew the way the clocks pulled at each other across a city. I blocked the number and deleted the image and made the mistake of opening the trash and looking at it again. I have moved my desk away from the wall and pushed my dresser against the closet. I tell myself it is because the room looks better this way. In the quiet around midnight, I hear what I tell myself is the fridge. It knocks once and waits for me to answer, and I do not say my name. I stand still and try not to think of a place where salt is a thin line that can be disturbed by a breath. I try not to think of the hinge screws scratched by hands from the inside. When the knock comes a second time, softer, I remind myself that a rule can be a way to keep your heart from stepping through a small, square door, and I do not speak in the dark.